All right, Crim 1, welcome to the semester and Chapter 1. So Chapter 1 discusses what the actual criminal justice system is. Well, it discusses kind of a lot of stuff, but when we're talking about a system, it's, of course, a group of agencies that work together. For purposes of this particular class, when we're talking about the criminal justice system, generally speaking, we're referring to law enforcement or the police, the courts, and corrections. So that's basically, those are the three sections this course is going to be broken up into. And let's go. Come on. There we go. So who is involved? There are more people involved, or more agencies involved, but that's, again, what we're going to focus on in this class is going to be those three. But criminal justice system, who's involved? Basically everybody. Police, victims, advocates, judges, lawyers, jurors, correctional officers, parole officers, and many others. So even we as normal citizens become involved in the criminal justice system by ways of, it's in here, by ways of juries. So yeah, these are the groups that we're going to be talking about a lot in this class. So first and foremost, I think it's important to understand why we have laws, what laws are, and what they're based on. So starting with the definition of the word norm, which is obviously short for something that's normal, a rule that makes it clear what behavior is appropriate and expected in a particular situation. So if we were all sitting in a classroom, for example, what would be normal behavior for a student versus what would be normal behavior for an instructor? Would it be normal for either of us to be talking on our cell phones, or would it be normal for an instructor to arrive in their pajamas? Things like that. Those are probably not normal. And most of us don't necessarily need to be told what kind of behaviors are norms. We've learned this throughout life, mostly probably from our parents, from childhood. You know, it's not okay to pick your nose in public, that kind of stuff. Deviance would be a violation of a norm. So if you are the person who decides to come to school with no clothes on, I don't know, just throw that out there, that would be a violation of the norm, and you would be considered a deviant. And then social norms are rules that specify how people are expected to behave. Again, these are things that we most likely learned when we were children. Our parents often correct us when we do things that we aren't supposed to do. So yeah, we'll start with those. Next, crime. Crime is also considered a violation of the law. So there are a couple different types of crimes. We have mala in se crimes. These are crimes that are evil unto themselves or morally wrong, versus mala prohibita crimes. A crime that is statutory is a statutory crime, but defined only by public opinion. So an example of a mala prohibita offense, for example, could be something like using drugs. Let's say even, 10 years ago in California, smoking marijuana. Is it inherently wrong to smoke marijuana? Most of us would probably say, no, it's not inherently wrong. Versus rape of a child. Most of us would say that raping a child is evil unto itself and morally wrong. So that would be considered a mala in se crime. A lot of words in the justice system still happen to be Latin words. So when you see mala in se and mala prohibita, that's what those are. And yeah, next. Three sections, like I mentioned, would be law enforcement, the courts, and corrections. This used to be can be the order in which people make their way through the criminal justice system. Almost always, the initial contact in any kind of criminal act that goes through the justice system is going to go through law enforcement first. The cops are always the first ones that are going to be contacted. I like to say, think, for example, they're the front line. Think, for example, today. Maybe you've been out today, maybe you haven't. Within the last week, let's say, how many of you have seen a police officer? Obviously, you don't have to answer that question because we're not in class together, but most of you are probably going to say, yeah, I've seen a police officer within the last week. When was the last time you saw a judge? Yeah, I'm going to guess that unless you're married to a judge, you know a judge, or you work in the courthouse, this is probably not someone that you're going to see very often. They're not necessarily on the front lines. Think correctional officer. Again, unless you are, have a relative who's a correctional officer, most of you aren't going to on a daily basis see a correctional officer either. So these are the three sections. Victim services is also a fourth, an important part of the justice system. Unfortunately, having worked in the justice system as a probation officer, I can tell you that victims do sometimes get forgotten, and it's super unfortunate, but it is true. I can openly, honestly admit as a probation officer that a lot of times I did not follow through with victims when they were trying to receive restitution and things like that because I was so busy trying to keep my offenders from breaking the law. It's not an excuse, it's just a fact. So how cases work through the system. I usually ask this in class as well. How many of us have been the victim of a crime? Most people have at some point. That something's been stolen, hopefully not a violent crime, but most of us at some point in our lives have been the victim of crime. How many of us have reported that crime? And I can tell you, usually I'll have, a handful of people who say they've been victimized, and usually that same handful of people will say they did not call the police. Why? There's a bunch of reasons why people don't report crimes. Maybe they don't trust the police. Maybe they're fearful of retaliation. Maybe they just didn't think it was worth it if it was something small. Maybe they didn't have time. Maybe they didn't want to be considered a snitch. There's a million reasons why people don't they don't report crimes. So of the crimes that are reported, some of those go solved and some of those do not. Some of those are prosecuted, some of those are not. And some of those, very few of those actually end in conviction. So the number of crimes committed, whereas the number of actual convictions is significantly smaller. So, most of you probably have been to the store and seen people shoplift and stuff like that. Nobody's calling the police in those matters. So there's probably a lot more crime than we are aware of. But this slide kind of gives you an idea of the number of people arrested as opposed to how many are incarcerated. Kind of starts up here and goes all the way down to here. Clearly, a lot of people will start in the arrest mode, but very few are actually convicted. All right. Crime prevention or kind of philosophies on crime. There's a crime control model where, and this is typically your prosecution, your DA's office, arrest and prosecute. They are looking to protect the community, okay? Due process model. This is, generally speaking, your defense counsel side of the case. These are people who are much more interested in protecting the individual rights of the suspect and due process. So if you can imagine that you have two people in court in front of a judge, one of them has the mindset of arrest and prosecute, and the other has the mindset of protect individual rights and due process. This is how we come up with that adversarial relationship in the courtroom. All right. There we go. Okay, the next slide talks about the fear of crime in the United States. In general, according to research, residents believe there is much more crime than there actually is. So, can you imagine any reason why that might be? And there's probably a lot of reasons why, but a lot of it that we notice is media coverage. If and of course you're going to see on this slide it says if it bleeds, it leads. News media outlets need to make money, and they need people to watch their shows. They need them to read their papers. They need them to go to their websites so that they can make money off advertising. So what are we more drawn to read a story about? A police officer who saved a kitten from a tree, or the serial murderer in 3 towns over? We are definitely much more likely to pay attention to kind of the more dramatic and unfortunately ugly things that happen in society. Most videos that go viral, as you all probably know, are not videos of good things that happen. They're videos of horrible things that happen. So, and why else might we be more afraid of crime than we actually should be? Politicians definitely, they benefit from us believing that we need them. Special interest groups, things like that. So these are all things that really can impact how we feel about crime. And mostly it's because we see it. We also see TV shows, we listen to music, all these things kind of glorify and amplify crime. This is not to say that we shouldn't be afraid of crime, because indeed we should. If you live here in the Fresno area, you know that we have a fairly high crime rate, although these last few years, those rates have been coming down. And personally, I would say especially women, I think, have that fear of crime, which is really sad. It's not super common that a man would walk to his car in the parking lot in the evening and be afraid. Whereas women, if you're anything like me, you still have, you're looking over that shoulder all the time, maybe with the belief that crime might occur. Discrimination is a significant issue still in the criminal justice system. Individuals in jail and prisons or on probation are disproportionately people of color. This remains the case in current times, which is really sad. Racial disparities in the criminal justice system are seen as an extension of social divisions in U.S. society. Why are people of color being arrested more than non-people of color, than whites? Why are they being prosecuted more? Why are they being housed in correctional facilities more? Kind of a rhetorical question. There are a lot of answers for this, but those answers involve issues that need to be resolved and fixed in the justice system. Some argue that drug laws are discriminatory in their impact. One drug law that was very specifically appeared to be discriminatory was cocaine. In the 1990s, we encountered the crack era, and I know everybody always thinks I exaggerate this, but that was an insane time in society. Crack made people different, made people just violent and desperate, and it was insane. So there were laws that were written during that time that prosecuted people who were in possession of crack cocaine much more so than they did people who were in possession of powdered cocaine. It is the exact same chemical makeup. So if you think to yourself, and of course I think this to myself, who would be more likely to have crack cocaine and who would be more likely to have powdered cocaine? At that time, rich white people were using powdered cocaine. Poor people of color were using crack cocaine, and they were being sentenced to longer periods of time in custody. Ultimately, those laws changed, but there have been many times when this has happened in our society. So according to your book, laws affect Blacks and women more? There's so many challenges to the criminal justice system. So let's start with just these that are listed in your book. Cybercrime. Think about how many times a day you get a spam phone call, email, text, whatever, somebody trying to rip you off. These are super common. A lot of times they're coming from other countries, which makes it even more difficult to prosecute. Terrorism is also an issue that is a challenge to the criminal justice system today. Drugs they remain a challenge, even though we had the very unsuccessful war on drugs in the 80s and 90s. And now we've added fentanyl and a lot of overdoses to this problem. Excuse me. Leveraging technology to improve services. Technology has definitely changed the justice system and will continue to do so. Most of that technology has been helpful and relatively effective. Of course, DNA analysis, access to it. If we were to go to most crime labs, there would probably be a fairly significant backlog of DNA that had not yet been analyzed. It takes time. And this is something that is unfortunate because a lot of crimes probably go unsolved because that DNA never makes it to being analyzed. And of course, prison overcrowding. It has been a significant issue for decades in California, enough so that we had to release a significant number of inmates. But these are just some of the challenges that we will talk about. And I think that's it.